here we are again, my friends, my friends. Oh, here we are again. Um, I just want to express again, anybody who's watching my stream, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm really running quite a scattered racket here right now, just because I'm trying to do a lot of things at once, and it's preventing me from getting anything to the point of real excellence at an expeditious rate. So, yeah, the camera, I switched to the webcam side. I usually look at this side, but now I'm looking at this side. So, um, I just, I've been, I'm, sometimes I'm a bit of a nut, you know what I mean? And I do that because I think it's kind of funny, and it's like, it's uplifting sometimes to try to laugh at things. But I'm dealing with some pretty darn serious matters. So, I veered off course. Like I had all of the serious matters, which I now have to deal with, on my plate for quite some time. But I thought that people wouldn't want to hear about it in this context, but I really have no choice. I feel as if this is the only course of action that I can take until a certain point, and if I'm able to reach a certain point of being able to do what I'm trying to do outside of the immediate entertainment streaming context, that that's what I was trying to do, an entertaining thing for people, you know what I mean, like because I figure that people would like to, if I could maybe entertain people and do something fun, then people would like it more. But it doesn't seem as if I'm able to do that. So this is what I'm really dealing with pretty much at present moment. I'm researching things so as to try to basically act as a successful political entity in this society, toward perfection of the society, toward an optimization for people, toward improvement. You know what I mean? So I think that miracles are possible. So miracles are possible, but we have to make them happen, right? So this is what I'm doing, and I hope that you guys will let me know anything that you may have to say about it. Like, if there's one thing that I want, it's to learn from you guys. So if you guys have anything to say with regard to anything that I'm doing here, please let me know. And the most optimal point of contact is always via a voice contact. So we could talk on any platform that facilitates like a voice text style communication, because I'm a speaker. I'm a writer as well, but I write in private, and I try to keep the written word to a minimum. I try to consolidate it. It's interesting, philosophically speaking, to think about the purpose of the written word. I mean, the written word was more practical, was very, very useful in the beginning of the evolution of human society and language, just because we were limited to a certain format. But I think in the modern context, video is interchangeable with the written word. So it's an interesting philosophical thing. But like, yeah, it's my philosophical reflection upon format, right? The format of the written word in comparison to maybe the spoken word, or drawing, or diagrammatic depiction, or things of that nature. It's an interesting time to be alive. The technological evolutionary process is leading us into an interesting intellectual dimension here. So let's see what we can get it together. Okay.
Well, preamble. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse, as a last resort, to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Whereas it is essential to promote the development of friendly relations between nations. Whereas the peoples of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity.
So the question I would ask to you guys is, do you think with all of this global protest, with what we see in Russia right now, with Navalny, I mean, Navalny is the opposition leader. And with all of the support that he has, he is currently serving time in a Russian prison, which I'm sure is not fun. So, even with all of the people's support, Navalny is still dealing with the level of disempowerment that he is. And this is the truth of the seriousness of politics, right? This is the reality of what it means to be a politically active person. So I wonder if we're ever going to be able to fix this problem, right? This problem of conflict within society. Because like ultimately, in my mind, we're evolving to some kind of like alien being that is no longer human. That's like a, you know, beyond human. But like, how long is that going to take, right? Is that going to take like 10 million years, or is it going to take like 500 years? But you know, thinking about that mode of existence, like an alien entity machine type thing with no war, with no human conflict except for in video games and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that would be preferable to the reality of human suffering that we see. So, I don't think everybody agrees with that. I think some people like the old school way of things, the tooth and claw competition. But to my mind, play a game of Apex Legends, bruh. This girl. Vice what's her name? Karen Leung? No, it's not. I can't remember what her name is. Anyway, Navalny. Back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights here. Where are we here?
In violation of this
No,
declaration.
that's a different one that I had open there. Let's close all these, shall we? Oh my god. Back up. Let's just read article for article. Alright.
Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Article 2.
Now, like, I mean, as soon as you read that, it sounds pretty airy. But, like, that's really the truth. I mean, like, there's the words of Christ telling us to all love one another, right? But, I mean, this is supposed to be the law of the land, globally. This is the United Nations law. And like it or not, that's the law. And so this is what we should be like, on a very serious legal basis. And I think that's what we need to do. We really need to come together in goodness, you know what I mean? And like it's just like I'm not sure what else to do, right? I'm not sure what else to do. I just have to worry about my own ability, my own limitations, right? I'm just trying to deal with my own limitations, and I'm always accessible for anybody who wants to talk to me. So I kind of just wait for you guys to talk to me.
Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political.
Now I want to speak to one thought that caused me to have. So in the Black Lives Matter movement, and you know, I will admit right off the bat, especially to my black friends, that there's no way there's no way to reconcile the subjective experience of two human beings, right? There is no way for me to know 100% the experience of an African American or a black person. There's no way I can ever walk in your shoes. But I would say from my white perspective, I was raised by a single mother on a limited income. I've met my biological father for like, you know, a couple of hours, and I had a decent a guy who was a very very kind man who helped me growing up, but you know, I was not I was not Donald Trump's son, right? Like I mean, like I'm something, but I'm, you know, born into limitations. And from my perspective, no matter what we do about racial equality, which we should strive very hard to achieve, peace, I mean, like among all human beings of all ethnicities and stuff. But I still think that the socioeconomic factors, no matter what we do about egalitarian society with regard to race specifically, I can tell you that there are a lot of white people that are murdered by police as well. And I mean, it's economics, right? Like if a cop sees a rich person that they know can afford good legal defense or whatever, that's going to affect their judgment. That's going to affect the way that they conduct themselves in relation to that person. And also just people who are not economically advantaged are just automatically put into more adverse circumstances off the bat. They're much more likely to encounter law enforcement. So I just, you know, I want to stress, I don't claim to be able to actually know anything about the subjective experience of others. However, I would say from my subjective experience, it's always going to boil down to social dominance hierarchy based upon things even independently of race, and the technical reality of the economy, which, as far as your rights are concerned under the law, means a heck of a lot. I was talking to a lawyer the other day. I was talking to a lawyer in downtown, not even a lawyer that I wanted to talk to, but a lawyer that his office referred me to. And I mean, the guy asked me for a $50,000 retainer up front. I can only imagine what the lawyer that I wanted to talk to would have asked me for. But like the guy asked me for a $50,000 retainer, which means that he wants $50,000 to retain his services, which means that, you know, by the end of my legal matters, he might rack up a bill of millions of dollars on me. You know, that says it all. I mean, you know, I've been a laborer on oil rigs. I have been an infantry soldier for a brief amount of time in training, but I've still, you know, I've experienced some degree of what the bottom of the economy has to offer in terms of a means to provide for oneself. And that lawyer, I mean, the reality of his day is difficult to reconcile with, very, very difficult to reconcile with the roughneck or the infantry. Come on, bro. And then I would say again, you know, like after dealing with some lawyers, after talking to some lawyers, I mean, if I ever had a lawyer that came up to me and said, "Listen, man, I got this. I know I got this for you," and I could tell that he meant it. I don't know. That might be the lawyer that I'd go with. I would never go with a blasé lawyer that's like, "I don't know. I don't have I don't have very much confidence in your case, sir." It's like, well, if you don't, you know, if you don't have any confidence in my case, show me a case that you have great confidence in. So I would just like to stress that you have to believe to be a good lawyer. I'd say you really have to believe in what you're doing. One of the best lawyer that I can think of, to my mind, is Legal Eagle. This guy. This guy's a freaking. He's a cool. He's a cool lawyer. Anyhow, I bet his retainer's like 5 mil. So, um, for all the pre-laws and all of the articled students out there, to all you guys, Jesus saves. Jesus saves, guys. Um, yeah. To all you articled students and pre-laws, get at me. I would like to know what you think about Jesus versus the world. Um, so trying to bring up the good old Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It blinked out on me. That was not my fault. That was a glitch in the Matrix. Here we are, Article 2, I believe.
Welcome to the Article 2. Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. Article 3.
I just want to review that last part. Jurisdictional or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. So this is trying to basically create a global, I mean, my interpretation of this is that it's trying to create a global protection, as far as I can tell, which should help in certain cases. There is a case that stands out to my mind, and there's a Canadian God, I'm so sorry for my offensive music on YouTube here. There's a Canadian awaiting death row. I mean, the two Michaels are definitely an interesting thing to think about. I mean, the two Michaels, obviously we want them home, but this guy's gonna get killed, man. And honestly, he looks like what's his name? He looks like Tim Apple, who's the CEO of Apple. I can't remember his name. Tim Cook. Tim Cook. He looks like a little bit like Tim Cook. So this guy, I mean, at the end of the day, he really disobeyed. I don't think he committed any violent crimes. The bottom line is that this guy, I mean, I would need more facts into his case. I need to look into it more. But, I mean, if he never physically harmed a person, then in my opinion, he ain't such a bad dude, right? Like, I mean, anybody who was going to consume the drugs that he was trafficking, they chose to use the drugs, right? So at the end of the day, like, you're going to murder him because, like, he just disobeyed a law that at the end of the day is, I mean, it's dependent upon people's choice to use drugs. So it's like, yes, he may have been harming them indirectly, but he didn't harm them as directly as some people, you know? So I just think death is it's a pretty severe thing. And luckily in Canada, I mean, this is why I tend to go off on little mini rants about Canadian patriotism, is because, you know, we're doing the right thing here, man. We've eliminated the death penalty. They should do that in the United States. The death penalty, in my opinion, is, I mean, anybody who supports the death penalty, I don't think you fully understand how bad a prison cell can be. I mean, there's no limitation to how uncomfortable you can make a prison cell. It's, in my opinion, it's you can't even compare. Would I rather die or live in a prison cell for the rest of my life that could be, you know, absolutely hell on earth in any multitude of ways? Obviously, I'd rather just end my life, you know. So it's like it's doesn't make any sense. It's just like every country on earth should do away with the death penalty. Number one, because of cases like this, where, I mean, like, I have to look into the facts of this case. But if this guy, you know, he wasn't even like carrying a firearm, he was just trying to smuggle drugs across the border. I don't know if he had guns on him or anything like that. But the point is that when nation states make drugs illegal, they are creating a black market, and people are trying to make money by working in a black market. Unfortunately, it's a question of economics again. We're back to the economics factor. So I just think at the end of the day, it seems pretty crazy, to kill people, just because it can never be undone, ever. And if they legalize amphetamines in the future, then this guy will be like, you know, I mean, think about him then. I mean, what if one day, 100 years from now, the world government, we globalize and they decide to legalize drugs? Well, then why did we kill this dude? Isn't that very barbarian? Doesn't that look pretty bad? What's this man's name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, Robert Lloyd Schellenberg. Robert Lloyd Schellenberg. I hope they don't kill him. He appealed, and they decided to give him the death penalty. They gave him 15 years to begin with. He appealed, and they gave him the death penalty.
Three. Everyone has the right to life, liberty and security of person. Article 4. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude, slavery, and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Article 5. No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Article 6. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Article 7. All are...
Article 6. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Again, I must stress the economic factor. I mean, it's kind of like academic systems of accreditation. I mean, on one, in a very real way, is it not way easier to obtain a degree if you have a lot of resources in order to pursue it? I mean, and then what is ultimately the value of a hyper-focused course of study? I mean, ultimately, I think most of the current academic system focuses greatly upon hyper-specialization. We want to specialize to such a degree that it focuses a person. In my opinion, that's a double-edged sword. Although you might delve very, very deeply and discover something, you're also kind of losing the Renaissance aspects of intelligence, and you're kind of creating a tunnel vision for yourself, because there might be something that is actually applicable from a very far removed field. You know, if you're studying, if you want to be a pediatric neuroscientist, yeah, I suppose I suppose there might be something of value in it, but from my perspective, just modern digital information systems seem to be very efficient. I mean, hypothetically, to my mind, you could do away with the need for all academic institutions simply by creating educational video games. Like, we could create a video. That's just a thought off the top of my head. It amazes me how much ingenuity and good programming goes into entertainment-based technology. Like Apex Legends is amazing. When you think about the talented software engineers that are working and developing at Respawn, it's like, it's amazing. But you could just create an automated system that would fully accredit someone with a PhD, and then just say, you know, have biometric sensing systems that would just monitor their usage of the system. And there you go. You could have the AI determine that it's a real human person the whole time, and it's a certain individual, and then they just use a digital system in order to fulfill all of the requirements of a PhD. But when I go online and I try to research getting my PhD, it says it's going to cost me like almost $100,000, or even more than that, to go to online source. It's like, I'm not so sure that seems reasonable, considering that PewDiePie is just uploading to YouTube, and he's making much more money than that. And yeah, it throws it all topsy-turvy. The technology is really throwing a curveball, I think, to the entire sense of what is reasonable in society. I just think we haven't really felt the full implications of modern digital technology yet. I think there's a huge gap. We're actually 50 years behind totally experientially what is now possible. I think there's a lag just because of how quickly things evolve at the future end of the spectrum. Like, you think about what the internet actually represents in terms of developing other technologies. It's just we can't really it's you can't compare it. You can't compare the current state of intelligence to previous times in human history, just because the technical reality, the technical truth of what it is.
Equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration, and against any incitement to such discrimination. Article 8. Everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted him by the Constitution or by law. Article 9. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention or exile. Exile. Article 10. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal.
This is an interesting point of consideration. Independent. It is absolutely essential that any judge or justice that is presiding in any case is objective. But is that even possible? I mean, can we ever achieve true moral objectivity as a human being? We're always subject to some margin of bias.
Tribunal, in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. Article 11. 1. Everyone charged with a penal offence has the right to be presumed innocent until proved guilty according to law in a public trial at which he has had all the guarantees necessary for his defence. 2. No one shall be held guilty of any penal offence on account of any act or omission which did not constitute a penal offence, under national or international law, at the time when it was committed. Nor shall a heavier penalty be imposed than the one that was applicable at the time the penal offence was committed. Article 12. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honour and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Article 13. 1. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. 2. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. Article 14. 1. Everyone has the right to seek and
I just wanted to reflect upon Article 13 there. I mean, it seems very difficult. It seems very difficult to compare this to what we experience as people in dealing with international borders. Very, very funny to read that. I really, really hope that this has some validity in a legal context.
and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. 2. This right may not be invoked in the case of prosecutions genuinely arising from non-political crimes or from acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Article 15. 1. Everyone has the right to a nationality. 2. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality nor denied the right to change his nationality. Article 16. 1. Men and women of full age, without any limitation due to race, nationality or religion, have the right to marry and to found a family. They are entitled to
I like that because although I'm unmarried and I've never been married and I've never had any children, I like how it sanctifies that for us, because I do want to get married and I do very much want to start a family and stuff like that. But like, I like how that humanizes us. For all of those swinging bachelors that don't want to do that, I mean, there are people in the world that I have seen that don't want to get married, they don't want to have children. I mean, that's interesting to me. It's very, very interesting to me. But I like how they mention that.
Equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. 2. Marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. 3. The family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society, and is entitled to protection by society and the state. Article 17. 1. Everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. 2. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. Article 18. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion.
To all of those people considering that, I'm just the one thing that the property, the mentioning of property there. I mean, I was reflecting upon somebody that was a perpetrator of or a suspect for a recent theft locally. Somebody had stolen something, and I just, I have a lot of things that somebody could rip off, and I have been violent. Somebody has stolen my personal possessions in the past. I had some stuff stolen when I was a kid. It's not fun. It's not fun to have your stuff stolen. But I do think that in comparison to physically hurting somebody's body, it's a pretty peaceful thing to do. I mean, I don't have too much bane for people who try to steal other people's stuff. I think in comparison to somebody who is gonna physically assault somebody or sexually assault somebody or something like that, yeah, I just think it's I would have a little bit of mercy on them. They're probably just poor people. Poor and stupid.
Religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Article.
I'm sorry, but I have to reflect again. I have to mention, there's a church, there's a Protestant Christian church close to where I live, and I went to the church to sing in the choir, and I was actually singing with the choir at this church for several different choir practices, and I thought things were going great. I was having fun, and then, for no reason, the guy who works at the church, he's the music director of the church, he says that I'm not to sing with the choir anymore, and basically telling me that he's trying to pull something. And I'm like, this is a Christian church, and you're saying I'm not allowed to sing with your choir? What is this, right? And then he called the police on me, cause I said, in my opinion, it just, in my opinion, it just shows it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. That, as far as I can tell, the local government, my local government, the local government that I'm under, it's certainly not having any reverence for this legislation, which needs to happen, and that's why I'm doing this right now, is because ultimately this is supposed to be law, people. This is actually supposed to be law. Wouldn't it be a perfect world if this was as serious a law as somebody freaking stealing your Mercedes-Benz?
Article 19. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media, and regardless of frontiers. Article 20. 1. Everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. 2. No one may be compelled to belong to an association. Article 21.
Just one thing that it caused me to reflect upon is that, when protests turn into riots, it's interesting how the right to protest is so, it's so mentioned and sanctified, and then how do we do this? How do we balance a group of angry people? It's a real, this is why I am dealing with this. I really like Apex Legends. I really like music and all that stuff, but like ultimately this problem in society, like this conflict in society, I just feel like I have to follow through with this, right? Like I have to try, because when we globalize, we're already essentially global, but like this problem's never going to go away. The problem of the division of society and the conflict between people in society. To my mind, it's mostly economics, right? Like it's mostly just a matter of people not having what they need, right? Like they don't have what they need, and it just causes conflict, right? I wonder what's going to happen to me.
21. 1. Everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through freely chosen representatives.
This is interesting because I've been banned. They have police physically eject me from the local government building, like the city hall. Like I went there, and like police like chased me out of the building. I'm dressed in a suit, and they chased me out of the building. Like I just I think it's strange what's happened to me. I'm not.
Representatives. 2. Everyone has the right of equal access to public service in his country. 3. The will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections which shall be by universal and equal suffrage.
So this is interesting. This creates a very teetotal democratic perspective on things. The will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. Plato was a critic of democracy. So Plato was very he was quite anti-democratic, primarily based upon, like, the best criticism of democracy that I can think of, or that after researching the topic a little bit is that I can think of, is that in previous epochs a direct form of democracy was not possible. According to the scientific paradigm, because of the modern technological circumstance, we should be able to achieve that. So I'm not sure if the ultimate criticism of democracy would still hold validity in this context, but I'd be interested to know if anybody else can think of a strong argument against democracy. I mean, the idea of mob rule, just that a group mentality can sometimes not be something to give absolute power to. Even groups of people go heinously wrong sometimes. I mean, that's obvious. So we don't even have to mention that. So, just, I think that's, to some degree, a good criticism, is that we know that, the Holocaust happened. We know that the Roman Empire, which represents one of the most organized governments in ancient history, they were very vicious and violent. And I just think that there is reason to assert that mob mentality kind of automatically asserts itself to some degree.
And shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedure.
On any scale. I should have had.
Procedures. Article 22. Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to social security, and is entitled to realization, through national effort and international cooperation, and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity, and the free development of his personality. Article 23. 1. Everyone.
What does social security mean? Has the right to social security. That could be interpreted a number of ways.
Asian through national effort and international cooperation, and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity, and the free development of his personality. Article 23. 1. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and...
See, again, the way that I have been treated by my employers, I mean, it's unfathomable. Some of the the way it's amazing to go and try and work a Joe job. You know what I mean? Like, to all of those people that work for minimum wage, anybody who's potentially considering this that is actually making minimum wage right now. It depends on your age, but like I think you should never work for less than your age. If you're 22 years old, you should be you should not settle for less than $22 an hour. That's for darn sure. And I just think, yeah, I mean, like, from my experience, the people who did not submit to that um, seem to be doing much better because they have a stronger sense of self-efficacy. And you know, I worked Joe jobs, I worked labor positions and low-level jobs, and it really did not do anything to help me from my perspective. So I just think it's interesting when I reflect upon how some of my employers have treated me. Like, I was assaulted by a guy named Rob Nadeau on a large oil rig in Alberta for no reason. Like, I was like working my shift, I was just minding my own business, working a really hard and dangerous job in like negative 40-degree temperatures, and then Rob was like, you know, he assaulted me for no reason. Like, I was like, what is this? And you know, he fired me for like I was busting my ass there. And then I go home and I turn on the TV and, like, you know, Mick Jagger has $700 million. So I don't know. Believe in yourself.
And favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. 2. Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
This is amazing. I mean, when we compare the value of human labor to the value of other forms of employment, it's just so impossible to acknowledge how, you know, people die in labor positions. Like, a kid that was working on one of the oil rigs that I was working on, the kid that I assumed the job of lost both his ring and his pinky finger. Like, I got onto this job and they're like, hey, there was an 18-year-old kid working your job last night and he lost both of his fingers. And I was like, holy God, man. I mean, like, that guy, he's not going to have fingers for the rest of his life for working. He was making like $32 an hour. $32 an hour at 18. I mean, yeah, that seems nice to them. But, you know, some kid who sat at home and Twitch streamed, you know, what's that guy's, Booga? I think he played video games and won millions of dollars. How do you say that? It's just it's very difficult to fully acknowledge the disparity of the ultimate human enterprise and organization. It's just, it boggles the mind.
Work. 3. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. 4. Everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interests. Article 24. Everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. Article 25. 1. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security.
I just, you know, with people's way of thinking, and to touch on the labor, the articles that apply to human labor and work, we really are at the, you know, at the evolution of society. Like, if we create I was just thinking about how to implement robotics to do away with the need for human laborers. I mean, all of these things are possible. So this does hold some validity, I think, in that the old world way of thinking wants to subjugate human beings to servitude because they think that it's the only way to achieve the labors that need to occur in order to provide for everyone. But we really have the opportunity now. I mean, with agile robotics, to like do away with human labor. It's amazing. So I just think it applies. I mean, it holds a little bit of validity because we should strive very hard to make this the law.
Security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. 2. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protection. Article 26. 1. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. 2. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality.
I just wanted to say that, I mean, again, I did kind of criticize academic society, or the academic system or perspective on things a little bit earlier, but it is beautiful what universities can be in terms of providing people with infrastructure and resources in order for society to flourish. It is great. But there is another point of criticism that I would make. If we're using the degree system in order to ignore technical reality, in order to ignore technical truths, or strategically subvert human rights, then it can be counterproductive.
And to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. 3. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. Article 27. 1. Everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. 2. Everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests.
It's just caused me to think about this. It's, somewhat unrelated. I'm somewhat abstracted here. But I would like to say this. As a spiritually open-minded person, I do see there as being a lot of spiritually open-minded and enlightened people, believers in this world. Like, I think there's more people that I meet that believe in something other than a stark scientific materialism. Call it like a simulation theory if you want. But even with simulation theory, like if we're talking about simulation theory, how can any system account for the technical truth of that? Like, how can anything actually understand God, essentially? Like, God is beyond, right? So if you do have patience for God, you have patience for the concept of God, then it's difficult for any system to be able to reconcile with that, I think.
Interests resulting from any scientific, literary or artistic production of which he is the author. Article 28. Everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized. Article 29. 1. Everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. 2. In the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in
Just this mention of morality causes me to reflect upon this. This is just it. Is that, are we living in a competitive society? Is it based upon competition, or is it based upon cooperation? From my perspective, it's entirely based upon cooperation, and even the idea of competition is kind of like ridiculous. In that, I just see there as being more negative things that accompany competition rather than cooperation, because something like like creating human immortality, like being able to achieve human biological immortality. That's a good dream. I would I would be in strong support of that. I think that's truly possible. Imagine what we have to do to achieve that. Um, it it's infinite. We need to really pull up our bootstraps here, guys.
A democratic society. 3. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Article 30. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein.
So kind of a self-reaffirming statement there. Okay, so that's the entire Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's pretty good. I like it. It's very wholehearted, optimistic. I like it a lot. Let's look at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You can tell I'm a real great typer. Okay. Start at the top here.
Guide to the Canadian Charter of Rights. What is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms sets out those rights and freedoms that Canadians believe are necessary in a free and democratic society.
I just want to state off the top of my up the tippity top. Canada is the greatest nation on earth, but we could be better. But we are the greatest nation on earth. I deeply appreciate what Canada truly is, and we could still be better though.
Society. The Charter is one part of the Canadian Constitution. The Constitution is a set of laws containing the basic rules about how our country operates. For example, it states the powers of the federal and provincial and territorial governments in Canada. How does the Charter work with other Canadian laws? The Constitution is the supreme law of Canada. All other laws must be consistent with the rules set out in it. If they are not, they may not be valid. Since the Charter is part of the Constitution, it is the most important law we have in Canada. However, the rights and freedoms in the Charter are not absolute. They can be limited to protect other rights or important national values. For example, freedom of expression may be limited by laws against hate propaganda or child pornography. Section 1 of the Charter says that charter rights can be limited by laws.
Here's something interesting. So a specific point of consideration with regard to my legal matters. So freedom of expression. There's a proportionality. So if you say something offensive to somebody and then they ban you from the premises, I would suggest that that is reasonable, right? Like, depending upon the exact nature of what was said. But I must stress that powers should be limited as well, and I just don't see that as being the case with what I'm experiencing. Like, if a person were to make an offensive statement, you need to take the exact nature of the offensive statement and then weigh it against the full scope of what we see in society in terms of like wrongdoing, and you have to limit government's power, and that's what this is intended to do. It's intended to limit the government's power, and from my perspective, it just seems as if the government is breaking these laws right now. Like, they're breaking the laws with regard to the conduct in relation to me, because I am currently banned from public space close to where I live, and from my perspective, it was their wrongdoing. It was the government's wrongdoing that initiated the entire thing, and then I was kind of a smart aleck about it. Like, I made smart alecky statements, but I didn't say, I'm gonna take a baseball bat and hurt you with it, right? I just made smart alecky statements, and it's like, you shouldn't be able to ban a person permanently for making smart ass statements. It's it, it's a case where I'm stuck in a situation where the government is essentially breaking their own laws, and this is what I'm trying to do something about it. But for me to do something about it is this. It's a challenge. So I'm not sure what else I can do, but let me know your thoughts.
So long as those limits can be shown to be reasonable in a free and democratic society. Who does the Charter protect, and what rights are protected? Any person in Canada, whether they are a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident or a newcomer, has the rights and freedoms contained in the Charter. There are some exceptions. For example, the Charter gives some rights only to Canadian citizens, such as the right to vote as Section 3, and the right to enter, remain in, and leave Canada Section 6. History of the Charter. The Charter came into force on April 17, 1982. One section of the Charter, Section 15, came into effect 3 years after the rest of the Charter, on April 17, 1985, to give governments time to bring their laws into line with the equality rights guaranteed in Section 15. Section 16.1 was added to the Charter in 1993. It makes clear that the English-speaking and French-speaking communities of New Brunswick have equal rights, and that the government of New Brunswick has a duty to protect and promote those rights. Before the Charter came into effect, other Canadian laws protected many of the rights and freedoms that are now included in it. One example is the Canadian Bill of Rights, which Parliament enacted in 1960. It applies to legislation and policies of the federal government and guarantees rights and freedoms similar to those found in the Charter. However, the Bill of Rights is not part of the Constitution of Canada. For decades, the Charter has been the source of change, progress, and the...
I do want to understand that. I do want to understand this distinction here.
It applies to legislation and policies of the federal government and guarantees rights and freedoms similar to those found in the Charter.
Well, it's still a Canadian piece of law and legislation, whether or not it's part of the Constitution. I think that seems arbitrary.
Charter. However, the Bill of Rights is not part of the Constitution of Canada. For decades, the Charter has been the source of change, progress, and the affirmation of our society's values. Canadian courts have rendered hundreds of decisions in which they apply the Charter to bring Canadian laws into line with the principles and values of Canadian society. For example, with respect to language rights, the Charter has reinforced the rights of official language minorities. With regard to equality rights, the Charter has led to the recognition and enforcement of the rights of a number of minority and disadvantaged groups. In criminal matters, the Charter has clarified the state's powers with respect to the rights of the accused. Part I. Understanding the Charter. This part of the guide sets out the actual text of each section of the Charter, followed by an explanation of its meaning and purpose. Guarantee of Rights and Freedoms, Section 1. Fundamental Freedoms, Section 2. Democratic Rights, Sections 3 to 5. Mobility Rights, Section 6.
I just wanted to mention that, all of this occurs within the Commonwealth, right? So we are deriving most of the principles and the principles of society and fundamental freedoms from the Commonwealth. So maybe we'll dig into some Commonwealth law a little bit later on. I think I'm going to go to the Bill of Rights after this, and then the British Columbia Human Rights Code. So that's what we're headed for, people.
Section 6. Legal rights, sections 7 to 14. Equality rights, section 15. Official languages of Canada, sections 16 to 22. Minority language educational rights, section 23. Enforcement, section 24. General sections 25 to 31. Application of Charter, sections 32 and 33. Guarantee of rights and freedoms, section 1. 1. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic.
Obviously, this is the ticket, right? The demonstrably justified. John Q. Lagos. Every will that I have is demonstrably justified. So from my perspective, are cops good people? Are police officers good people? I suppose there's a gradient, just like there is in civil society, right? But from my perspective, are the law enforcement officers? It's taken me the only reason I'm considering a career in law enforcement is because I feel that it's a way to prevent the conflict between me and the people that seem to be limiting my rights, that seem to be infringing upon my freedom, right? So it would be like maybe if I were to become a law enforcement officer that I'd be able to do it with a more enlightened perspective. Maybe I'd be able to make good progress. So I'm trying to put forward an application to be fair to them. But on some level, I think there is a lot of motivation that drives people toward the justice system where they see society as kind of chaotic and they think that a strategic move toward being the trigger man is going to be in their best interest. That's some margin of it. Now, the question is, in implementing modern police forces in order to organize society, what percentage of the investment that we are making in it is actually having the desired outcome? Is it a sizable percentage? There's a process underway right now where there is legislation being reformed in British Columbia. So there is a reforming of the current Police Act in British Columbia. That's happening right now. So if anybody does care about this specific issue that I'm just mentioning right now, you should definitely contact the Legislative Assembly in Victoria right now because it's a good time to do so. The window is still open, and if you mention anything to them, please mention me as well. Mention my plight here.
Society. The Charter protects those basic rights and freedoms of all Canadians that are considered essential to preserving Canada as a free and democratic country. It applies to all governments, federal, provincial, and territorial, and includes protection of the following: fundamental freedoms, democratic rights, the right to live and seek employment anywhere in Canada, legal rights to life, liberty and personal security, equality rights for all, the official languages of Canada, minority language education rights, Canada's multicultural heritage, Indigenous peoples' rights. The rights and freedoms in the Charter are not absolute. They can be limited to protect other rights or...
I just wanted to mention Indigenous people's rights because I have a good buddy, and it's funny how I was relating to the council, the Indigenous Council, and even in I thought that the Indigenous Council would be of a slightly more compassionate nature than the municipal councils of the governments that fall off the reserve. I just thought by their nature, but it's like he was relating to them much as he was expressing his dissatisfaction with the First Nations Council on his reserve as well. So I'm in dealing with my local polity, I seem to be in the same position that he is. So it's funny.
Important national values. For example, freedom of expression may be limited by laws against hate propaganda or child pornography. Fundamental Freedoms, Section 2. 2. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. Under Section 2 of the Charter, Canadians are free to follow the religion of their choice. In addition, they are guaranteed freedom of thought, belief and expression.
I just wanted to mention, like, I have spent some time going to different religious temples. I mean, I tried to visit each religion to some degree to try to understand firsthand. And from my perspective, like, religion is a great way to commune with your fellow human beings, right? You just kind of like meet your fellow human beings, but it's much less about it's much less about spirituality, like legitimately relating to God, than, or I think, I just think it's much more about my fellow human beings. Like, religion is much more about connecting with people, and so it is interesting to think about that. And personally, I would kind of recommend that all of the really hardcore religious folk, they try checking out their local gym, because I get a real sense of connecting with people at the gym as well. Not that I'm going to reject religion, but I would hit the gym 6 days a week and your temple 1 day a week.
Expression. Since the media are an important means for communicating thoughts and ideas, the Charter protects the right of the press and other media to speak out. Our right to gather and act in peaceful groups is also protected, as is our right to belong to an association like a trade union. These freedoms are set out in the Charter to ensure that Canadians are free to create and express their ideas, gather to discuss them and communicate them widely to other people. These activities are basic forms of individual liberty. They are also important to the success of a democratic society like Canada. In a democracy, people must be free to discuss matters of public policy, criticize governments, and offer their own solutions to.
I just want to say also, like, I've gotten some political communications back recently. I did receive some limited political I'm running for public office here, so I mean, the polity and the local government says I'm not allowed to run for public office, which is like another point that drives me here. Is like, it's funny to think about how it all works out. I mean, like, ultimately it's completely chaos, right? Like, the reality of what we face in relation to the organization and governance of human society, it's chaos. It's total chaos. But through the chaos, we can create amazing things, right? Like, we can create things that we never imagined were possible. But at the same time, I think it's all just a matter of having faith, right? Like, you're not going to be met with things as they are described, right? You're going to be met with human beings and all of the qualities that apply to human beings. So ultimately, I hope that I'm trying to make it all work out for the best for everyone. And yeah, I just thought that some of the communications that I received back were rather funny with regard to the criticisms, right? Like, I got some like really funny communications back, and in reflecting upon some of my own communications to local authority figures, local politicians, I just yeah, I hope that everybody understands everybody else's sense of humor, right? Because we all have to live here together.
To social problems. Even though these freedoms are very important, governments can sometimes limit them. For example, freedom of expression may be limited by laws against hate propaganda or child pornography because they prevent harm to individuals and groups. Democratic rights, sections 3 to 5. Democratic rights of citizens, section 3. Maximum duration of legislative bodies, section 4. Annual sitting of legislative bodies, section 5. Sections 3, 4 and 5 of the Charter contain rules that guarantee Canadians a democratic government. Section 3 is Democratic Rights of Citizens. 3. Every citizen of Canada has the right to vote in an election of members of the House of Commons or of a legislative assembly, and to be qualified for membership therein. Section 3 guarantees to all Canadian citizens the right to be involved in the election of their governments. It gives them the right to vote in federal, provincial or territorial elections, along with the right to stand for public office themselves. Some limits on these rights may be reasonable, even in a democracy. For example, the right to vote or stand for election is limited to Canadians 18 years of age or older.
Yeah, it's these limitations that can be imposed, right? I mean, like, this is the ultimate, the fulcrum that we are facing. Demonstrably reasonable. Oh.
Older. Section 4 Maximum duration of legislative bodies. 4.1 No House of...
The maximum duration thing caused me to reflect on Trump saying that he was going to have 3 terms as president. I think that was the clincher for me when I was like, all right, that's it. I'm done. I mean, like, not that I wasn't that way before with Trump, but I think it also, as soon as Ginsburg, the Ginsburg thing, where Ginsburg passed away and he appointed her, and her dying wish was that he doesn't, she said this to her granddaughter, she's like, her dying, as soon as that happened, I knew that the spirit of Ruth Bader Ginsburg would see a Democratic victory. I knew it. I said it. I knew it. Because he went too far. Trump went too far. And his number one point of pride, I think, was that he filled the courts with so many judges. And this is the thing of concern, right? Like, I mean, ultimately... The seriousness of politics is not a laughing matter, right? Think about being imprisoned for decades of your life for non-violent marijuana trafficking. Like, think if you never carried a gun and you were people have spent decades of their life for kilograms and like lots and like mass quantities of marijuana, and then the government decides to change their mind. What about the guy who's going to die for Disoxin? If we're going to evolve...
Of Commons, and no legislative assembly shall continue for longer than 5 years from the date fixed for the return of the writs at a general election of its members. Continuation in special circumstances. 2. In time of real or apprehended war, invasion or insurrection, a House of Commons may be continued by Parliament, and a legislative assembly may be continued by the legislature beyond 5 years if such continuation is not opposed by the votes of more than 1/3 of the members of the House of Commons or the legislative assembly, as the case may be. It is a basic principle in a democracy that a government must consult the voters and stand for re-election at regular intervals. Section 4 states that no parliament or legislative assembly can continue to sit for longer than 5 years. Only under extraordinary circumstances, such as a war or national emergency, may a government stay in office for a longer period. Section 5 Annual sitting of legislative bodies. 5. There shall be a sitting of Parliament and of each legislature at least once every 12 months. Another basic democratic principle is that a government must explain its actions to the people. Section 5 of the Charter makes it clear that Parliament and the legislative assemblies must hold a session at least once a year. This guarantees that elected members and the public have a chance to question government actions on a regular basis. Mobility rights, Section 6. Mobility of citizens. 6. 1. Every citizen of Canada has the right to enter, remain in and leave Canada. Rights to move and gain livelihood. 2. Every citizen of Canada, and every person who has the status of a permanent resident of Canada has the right to move to and take up residence in any province, and to pursue the gaining of a livelihood in any province. Limitation. 3. The rights specified in subsection A2 are subject to any laws or practices of general application in force in a province other than those that discriminate among persons primarily on the basis of province of present or previous residence, and any laws providing for reasonable residency requirements as a qualification for the receipt of publicly provided social services. Affirmative Action Program. 4. Subsections A2 and A3 do not preclude any law, program or activity that has as its object the amelioration in a province of conditions of individuals in that province who are socially or economically disadvantaged if the rate of employment in that province is below the rate of employment in Canada. Section 6 protects the right of Canadian citizens to move from place to place, and subsection 6(1) ensures that all Canadian citizens are free to come and go as they please. Extradition laws place some limits on these rights. These laws state that persons in Canada who face criminal charges or punishment in another country may be ordered to return to that country. Subsection 6(2) gives all Canadian...
That's an interesting point of consideration. Just that, depending upon what it is, right? I can imagine.
Canadian citizens and permanent residents the right to move to and live in any province or territory. They may also look for work or set up a business there. Subsection 6(3) makes clear that provinces and territories may decide to give social benefits, such as welfare, only to persons who have lived in the province or territory for a certain period of time. They may also pass employment laws that require workers to have the necessary qualifications to practice their profession or trade. In addition, subsection 6(4) allows a province or territory that has an employment rate below the national average to create programs that favor its own residents. Legal rights, sections 7 to 14. Life, liberty and security of person, section 7. Search or seizure, section 8. Detention or imprisonment, section 9. Arrest or detention, section 10. Proceedings in criminal...
So in my case, I was working out at a gym. I went to a gym. A guy in the locker room said to me, "Do you want to fight?" He was a big dude. He's like, "Hey, you want to fight?" You know, he didn't... He had a strong accent. Like, he didn't seem too fluent in English. And he was like, "Hey, you want to fight?" And I was like, "Man, like, you know." I said to him, "I suggest you go get a rifle, bud." And then they called the cops on me, and they said that I threatened to kill him. That is not the same thing. Saying, like, he threatened me to begin with. He said, like, "Do you want to fight?" And I was like, you know, my case comes down to this thing. A guy at a gym called the police on me and claimed that I said something to another guy at the gym, neither one of whom actually appeared in the court during my trial. Like, a guy at a gym calls the police, says that another dude at the gym says that I said something to him. Neither one of them ever appeared in the courtroom during my trial, and then the police made immediate motion to arrest and detain me without hesitation. I was walking home, and you know, I knew that they were going to arrest me because of that. Because some dude at a gym claims that some other dude at that same gym claims that I said something to him. And I technically didn't even say it, and the judge even agrees that I didn't even say that thing. And they made full motion to arrest and detain me. So it's obvious to me that in my case, technically speaking, when you reflect upon it as I have just phrased it, which is my perspective on the absolute truth of things, how is that not arbitrary arrest? Right? And then the cops say, well, as soon as I get a call that says, so from my perspective, I was defending myself against arbitrary arrest, and it does say in terms of self-defense, I mean, we can review self-defense later, but it does say in terms of self-defense that if I believe that I am acting in defense of my rights, I am allowed to resist arrest. This is what the cop did to my face. I didn't hurt him, and they convicted me of assaulting the cop. And and he's making $100K a year. In my opinion, that's the clincher, boys. You know, if the cop is taking in money, he should have to work for his money, and that means you either get to punch me in the face or you get to convict me, but you can't have both. You know what I mean? And thus far, not too many people seem to acknowledge the extent of, you know, the injustice that I'm currently experiencing, and that's going to be the injustice that they experience as well, unless we come together and acknowledge that I have to be able to achieve some form of better justice here, people. I hope more people will be open to possibly speaking with me here.
Criminal and Penal Matters, Section 11. Treatment or Punishment, Section 12. Self-crimination, Section 13. Interpreter, Section 14. Sections 7 to 14 set out rights that protect Canadians when dealing with the justice system. They ensure that individuals who are involved in proceedings are treated fairly, especially those charged with a criminal offense. Section 7. A life, liberty and security of person. 7. Everyone has the right to life, liberty and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principles of fundamental.
This life, liberty, and security. Liberty. I think that's the key word here. That can be interpreted many ways. I think Canadian society wants to be all that I want it to be. But I do thoroughly enjoy the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I enjoy that brash optimism. That total dream state.
Liberty and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Section 7 guarantees the life, liberty and personal security of all Canadians. It also requires that governments respect the basic principles of justice whenever they intrude on those rights. Section 7 often comes into play in criminal matters, because an accused person clearly faces the risk that, if convicted, his or her liberty will be lost. Section 8. Search or seizure. 8. Everyone has the right to be secure against unreasonable search or seizure. According to the Supreme Court of Canada, the purpose of Section 8 is to protect a reasonable expectation of privacy. This means that those who act on behalf of a government, such as police officers, must carry out their duties in a fair and reasonable way. They can...
I mean, with regard to how I experience it. So what I experience is that it's just such a kind of contradictory thing in that, I mean, to become a law enforcement officer, there's inherent competition, and that competition breeds all the bad, in my opinion. We're only humans, right? Like, we're all only humans. So I really wonder if it's possible, you know. I want it to be possible. That's why I'm doing this.
Cannot enter private property or take things from others unless they can show that they have a clear legal reason. In most cases, they are allowed to enter private property to look for evidence or to seize things only if they have been given a search warrant by a judge. On the other hand, government inspectors may enter business premises without a warrant to check if government regulations are being observed. Section 9. A detention or imprisonment. 9. Everyone.
So there is an instance where I was sitting in my own home, and officers of the West Vancouver Police Department knocked on my door and arrested me for no reason, because I sent an email to somebody that was non-threatening and not illegal. So, from my perspective, like, the arbitrary nature of my arrest and detention is undeniable. But for me, in my circumstance, to demonstrate that factually in a court of law, I need all the help I can get. Come on, people. You got to appreciate where I'm coming from here. Like, I'm sitting in my home, and some local politician, like, had me arrested. From my perspective, I'm not sure how it actually went down, but, like, there's no more clear-cut a case of arbitrary arrest and detention than what I've experienced here in the District of West Vancouver. I mean, it's a clear-cut case. This is unrelated to the other matters that I was discussing, but for me to actually follow through with being able to secure that in a court of law, that's what this is, I hope.
Has the right not to be arbitrarily detained or imprisoned. Section 9 says that government officials cannot take individuals into custody or hold them without a good reason. For example, a police officer must have reasonable grounds for detaining a person. However, courts have stated that laws allowing officers to stop drivers for breath tests are reasonable and do not violate the Charter. Section 10. Arrest or detention. 10. Everyone has the right on arrest or detention. To be informed promptly of the reasons therefor. To retain and instruct counsel without delay, and to be informed of that right, and to have the validity of the detention determined by way of habeas corpus, and to be released if the detention is not lawful. The rights in Section 10 apply when a person is arrested or detained. They ensure that people under arrest have a chance to challenge the lawfulness of their arrest. The police must tell them quickly the reasons for their arrest. These people also have the right to talk to a lawyer to get legal advice about their situation.
I just want to speak to the nature of what it feels like to be arrested and detained by police. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. I mean, any cop that is a police officer right now that is working on a force anywhere that has never actually been arrested themselves, I suggest that they're unfit to be a police officer. I would suggest that every single cop should know what it feels like to be put into that position for real, because it's a you know, I just, with the George Floyd thing, I mean, looking at George Floyd's supposed resistance of his arrest, it does not look very forceful. He's a pretty big man, and that's what I've experienced at their hands, is that they're just so aggressive. I mean, from the guys that I was dealing with were aggressive, right? And I'm not saying that like every single cop is bad, but like, I just think I think it would be good for every single police officer to know it's a complete dissolution of your humanity to some degree, because you're just, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's just how I feel. That's why I think, like, you know, if I were to apply for a position in law enforcement, would I be treated fairly? I don't feel that my life experience would indicate to me that I already anticipate that from my perspective it would not be fair, right?
Situation, and the police must tell them what legal aid services are available in their area. Persons under arrest also have the right to ask a judge to decide whether their arrest was legal, and if it was not, to order their release. Section 11. Proceedings in criminal and penal matters. 11. Any person charged with an offence has the right to be informed without unreasonable delay of the specific offence, to be tried within a reasonable time, not to be compelled to be a witness in proceedings against that person in respect of the offense. To be presumed innocent until
I would just say that it causes me to reflect upon my own trial and the mistake that I made. From my perspective, the major mistake that I made during my own trial was that I chose to testify. And, like, I was a self-represented litigant, having never self-represented before in any context, and in any serious context. And I from that moment onward, from the moment that I testified in my own trial, that's when I think things went pretty wrong. So I have been placed in other circumstances where, and also I'd mentioned that during my trial, people did commit perjury, and the judge ignored that. So it's interesting how these things play out, right? But from my perspective, it's difficult, and anybody who is involved in a legal matter, I would say be very prepared before you take the witness stand in any circumstance. Be very prepared with regard to your own legal matters. I think being a witness in other people's legal matters is less of a serious endeavor.
proven guilty according to law in a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal. Not to be denied reasonable bail without just cause. Except in the case of an offense under military law tried before a military tribunal, to the benefit of trial by jury where the maximum punishment for the offense is imprisonment for 5 years or a more severe punishment. Not to be found guilty on account of any act or omission unless, at the time of the act or omission, it constituted an offense under Canadian or international law or was criminal according to the general principles of law recognized by the community of nations. If finally acquitted of the offense, not to be tried for it again, and if finally found guilty and punished for the offense, not to be tried or punished for it again, and if found guilty of the offense, and if the punishment for the offense has been varied between the time of commission and the time of sentencing.
No, this is causing me to reflect upon statutes of limitation, time periods, time limitations. I'm very opinionated about this. I do not think that at the end of the day it's good to pursue strong statutes of limitation because justice is justice, right? I mean, if somebody killed your brother 10 years ago but never got caught until 10 years later, would that make it any different? It just seems like they're trying to pass the buck on some things. And then again, I see convictions overturned and I see proceedings taking place much later. It's interesting how that's mentioned, right? I mean, like, statutes of limitation, I suppose is just trying to reduce certain things, trying to reduce certain arbitrary proceedings, I think.
Sentencing, to the benefit of the lesser punishment. Section 11 sets out several important rules that protect anyone charged with an offense under federal, provincial, or territorial law. Persons accused of a crime must be told promptly what offense they are charged with. Section 11A. Their trials must take place within a reasonable time. Section 11B. And they cannot be forced to testify at their own trials. Section 11C. Anyone accused of breaking the law is considered to be innocent until proven guilty. This means that the prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person committed the offense, before he or she can be found guilty. The trial must also be conducted fairly before a court which is unbiased and independent of political or any other influence. Section 11D. A fair trial ensures that the rights of the accused are properly protected. An accused person is entitled to reasonable bail. Section 11E, and for very serious charges, has the right to trial by jury. Section 11F. A court cannot convict a person of a crime unless the law in force at the time of the offense specifically stated that the actions in question were illegal. Section 11G. If a person is tried for an offense and found not guilty, he or she cannot be tried on the same charge again. Moreover, if the person is found guilty and punished for the offense, he or she cannot be tried or punished for it again. Section 11H. In a situation where a person commits an offense, and, before he or she is sentenced, a new law changes the fine or term of imprisonment that applies, that person must be sentenced under whichever law is the more lenient. Section 11I. Section 12. A treatment or punishment. 12. Everyone has the right not to be subjected to any cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. Section 12 prohibits treatment and punishment by the state that are cruel and unusual. This includes torture, excessive or abusive use of force by law enforcement officials. Also, sentences of imprisonment must match the seriousness of the crime committed. For example, an extremely long prison sentence is not appropriate for a very minor crime. Section 13. Self-incrimination. 13. A witness who testifies in any proceedings has the right not to have any incriminating evidence so given used to incriminate that witness in any other proceedings, except in a prosecution for perjury, or for the giving of contradictory evidence.
I would also say, the sex money god thing. I'm just trying to be funny, people. So, I did this here and here because I was trying to be uplifting and trying to there we go. I was trying to do good things, right? So this is what it's gonna be until that day.
Evidence. Section 13 states that witnesses who give evidence in court cannot have their testimony used against them in other proceedings. In other words, if the testimony of a witness shows that he or she has committed a crime, that evidence cannot be used by the prosecution to prove that the witness committed an offense. The exception is where a witness commits the crime of perjury, which is the offense of lying to the court. In that case, the testimony of the witness may be used to show that he or she lied in court. Section 14. Interpreter. 14. A party or witness in any proceedings who does not understand or speak the language in which the proceedings are conducted or who is deaf has the right to the assistance of an interpreter. Persons who are hearing impaired or do not understand or speak the language being spoken in court have the right to be assisted by an interpreter. This right applies regardless of which language is involved. Equality rights. Section 15. Equality before and under law and equal protection and benefit of law. 15. 1. Every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular, without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age or mental or physical disability. Affirmative action programs. 2. Subsection 1 does not preclude any law, program or activity that has as its object the amelioration of conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups including those that are disadvantaged because of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age or mental or physical disability. Section 15 of the Charter makes it clear that every individual in Canada, regardless of race, religion, national or ethnic origin, color, sex, age or physical or mental disability, is to be treated with the same respect, dignity, and consideration. This means that governments must not discriminate on any of these grounds in its laws or programs. The courts have held that Section 15 also protects equality on the basis of other characteristics that are not specifically set out in it. For example, this section has been held to prohibit discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, marital status or citizenship. The Supreme Court of Canada has stated that the purpose of Section 15 is to protect those groups who suffer social, political, and legal disadvantage in society. Discrimination occurs when a person, because of a personal characteristic, suffers disadvantages or is denied opportunities available to other members of society. At the same time as it protects equality, The Charter also allows for certain laws or programs that aim to improve the conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups. For example, programs aimed at improving employment opportunities for women, indigenous peoples, visible minorities, or those with mental or physical disabilities are allowed under subsection 15(2). Official Languages of Canada, sections 16 to 22. Official Languages of Canada, section 16. English and French linguistic communities in New Brunswick, section 16.1. Proceedings of Parliament, section 17. Parliamentary Statutes and Records, section 18. Proceedings in courts established by Parliament, section 19. Communications by public with federal institutions, section 20. Continuation of existing constitutional provisions, section 21. Rights and privileges preserved, section 22. Sections 16 to 20 make clear that official language rights apply in respect of both the federal government and the provincial government of New Brunswick. Canadians can use English or French when they deal with the Government of Canada. Residents of New Brunswick also have the right to use English or French when they deal with their provincial government. Section 16. Official Languages of Canada. 16.1 English and French are the official languages of Canada, and have equality of status, and equal rights, and privileges.
So I just want to state this again, because it's going to be kind of strange. I mean, both my YouTube account and my Twitch account will house this kind of material until I'm able to meet you all in the best of circumstances. I just yeah, I want to clarify that. Like, I would like to be doing really fun and entertaining stuff for y'all, and I hope that gets to happen. Like, I hope we get to do some fun and entertaining stuff. I would love to play Apex with you guys. I'm trying to keep hope alive here, and I always want to hear from you guys. So, like, if you ever have anything to say, if anybody is, like, I've noticed that there are a couple people watching me lately, and I've been really, like, kind of uplifted to see. I mean, like, it feels really nice when you know there's a couple people that are here with you. You know what I mean?
Privileges as to their use in all institutions of the Parliament and Government of Canada. Official Languages of New Brunswick. 2. The English and French are the official languages of New Brunswick, and have equality of state.
Okay, in honor of that, we're taking a little breather here, and we're gonna go do one lesson in Duolingo, because it has legal integrity in Canada. We're gonna do one Duolingo here, and I would urge that everybody join me on Duolingo, because it's the bomb. I'm not as far in French as I am in Mandarin Chinese. Mandarin Chinese is super fun. Let's do something that I'm not gonna look terrible at. Let's go back to family, even though I've already completed it. I'm on level 2.
Marie et son frère.
Marie et son frère. Mary and her brother.
Marie et son frère.
See, this is what I mean by educationally optimized. Like, this is an optimized platform. I've taken college courses in languages, and this is it. I mean, like, compared to the nature of the learning process in that context, this is it. So, I just want to advocate that everybody appreciate how good it is, how good we now have it. It's finally arrived, intellectually, and in other ways, you know. But let's all appreciate what we have here, and let's try not to destroy that. I'm gonna try very hard not to. Anyhow, enough of that. Let's get back to French. My cat is talking to your dog. Mon chien.
Mon
Or
chien.
chien. Parler.
Parle.
Son chat. Or son. Oh. Mon chat.
Chat. Parle. Son chien.
Pardon me. Avec ton. Avec ton.
Avec ton chien.
Mon frère s'appelle Marc.
Mon frère s'appelle Marc. My brother's name is Mark. Mon. C'est Julien et son.
Et son
Student, étudiant. I just having trouble understanding this one.
et son Marc et son père.
I believe that's what it is. Mark is my father.
Marc et son père.
Mark and his father, sorry. Good lord, I'm terrible. I'll get better. Oops.
Mon père va bien.
My father is happy,
Va
is doing well.
bien. Ton chat va bien? Bien.
Oops, my key lock is, I've got key lock there. What am I to do here? Where's, oh no. Anyhow,
Le frère.
the brother,
Frère. Le.
your. Oh, it was the brother.
Marc et son père.
Le frère.
Oops. Frère, bro, pale. Okay, that's one lesson. So, then we'll do one Chinese, and then we're back to law here. We gotta get back to it.
Bien,
That was pretty much a lucky guess.
bien,
Oh Lord, I'm really bad right now. Joel.
右，右，旁，
All right, enough. I'm gonna screw up. I feel self-conscious.
Status and equal rights and privileges as to their use in all institutions of the legislature and government of New Brunswick. Advancement of status and use. 3. Nothing in this charter limits the authority of Parliament or a legislature to advance the equality of status or use of English and French. Subsections 16(1) and 16(2) confirm that English and French are Canada's and New Brunswick's official languages. They also say that both of these languages can be used equally in the institutions of Parliament and the Government of Canada, as well as all institutions of the Legislature and Government of New Brunswick. Note that the Charter guarantees that any member of the public can communicate with and receive service from the federal government in the official language of their choice. The Charter does not oblige any member of the public to become bilingual. Section 16.1 English and French linguistic communities in New Brunswick. 16.11 The English linguistic community and the French linguistic community in New Brunswick have equality of status and equal rights and privileges, including the right to distinct educational institutions and such distinct cultural institutions as are necessary for the preservation and promotion of those communities. Role of the Legislature and Government of New Brunswick. 2. The role of the Legislature and Government of New Brunswick to preserve and promote the status, rights and privileges referred to in subsection 1 is affirmed. Section 16.1 was added to the Charter in 1993. It makes clear that the English-speaking and French-speaking communities of New Brunswick have equal rights, and that the Government of New Brunswick has a duty to protect and promote those rights.
I just would mention in reflection that I think this is creating a very multicultural, multi-ethnic society for us, and it's important in Canada that we embrace that because, again, I think we are at the forefront of the evolution of society, and if we can create a peace here between people from China, people from Iran, people from the Western culture, if we can solidify that strong society here, then that's what will win, because that's everything. Like that's all of us, right? Or people from Africa. I forgot to mention people from Africa, but yeah, and I think we have a great quality of life here, and I think that's a part of the reason is because of this kind of protection of people's languages. I think much of society is based upon communication, right? We're supposed to this is kind of my effort at communicating outwardly, and I'm hoping that doing this in this way motivates me to do what I have to do. But I think it's an interesting thing. It's just an interesting thing to think about what we experience here in Canada.
Rights. Section 17, Proceedings of Parliament. 17.1 Everyone has the right to use English or French in any debates and other proceedings of Parliament. Proceedings of New Brunswick Legislature. 2. Everyone has the right to use English or French in any debates and other proceedings of the Legislature of New Brunswick. Section 18, Parliamentary Statutes and Records. 18.1 The statutes, records and Journal of Parliament shall be printed and published in English and French, and both language versions are equally authoritative. New Brunswick Statutes and Records. 2. The statutes, records and journals of the Legislature of New Brunswick shall be printed and published in English and French, and both language versions.
I am wondering if I'm going to be as thorough as this. Communications by public with federal institutions. Let's look at this. Okay, let's just skip ahead a sec here.
Communications by public with federal institutions. 20.1 Any member of the public in Canada has the right to communicate with, and to receive available services from, any head or central office of an institution of the Parliament or Government of Canada in English or French, and has the same right with respect to any other office of any such institution where there is a significant demand for communications with and services from that office in such language, or.
I just want to say, for all of the oddball communications that I've sent, and I have, just because I'm trying to be funny, basically. I mean, I'm trying to be uplifting. I don't know. I'm just like I reach out to people. Like I'm very. This is my effort at reaching out with you. If you should happen to be listening to me, So, you know, I sent a lot of things their way just because they're right there. I live next to City Hall. I live next to the government. I live surrounded by government. So I sent them a lot of things. But I think like karmic alignment. I mean, if I sent you weird or brash things, I'm running for political office. I expect a lot of weird and brash communications in the future. But the fact that like the political officials, I've been trying to communicate with them, and they're just not doing what I think political officials should do in my specific case. So
Due to the nature of the office, it is reasonable that communications with and services from that office be available in both English and French. Communications by public with New Brunswick institutions. 2. Any member of the public in New Brunswick has the right to communicate with, and to receive available services from, any office of an institution of the legislature or government of New Brunswick in English or French. Section 17 states that everyone has the right to use English or French in Parliament as well as the legislature of New Brunswick. For example, a witness before a parliamentary committee may use the official language of his or her choice. Section 18 states that federal laws as well as those of the government of New Brunswick must be published in both English and French, and that both versions are equally valid. Section 19 states that everyone has the right to use English or French in any court established by Parliament, including the Supreme Court of Canada, or by the government of New Brunswick. Section
for anybody that doesn't know, for anybody that is unaware, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada his first language is French, so it's interesting. He seems like a decent dude. Richard Wagner? I usually call him Wagner, but yeah, he seems like a nice man. I'm not in prison right now, so.
Section 20 outlines the right of Canadians to communicate with the federal government or with the government of New Brunswick in either English or French. These governments must provide services in both official languages at all of their central offices and other locations where there is a significant demand for them, or where it would be reasonable to expect them. Section 21 a continuation of existing constitutional provisions. 21. Nothing in sections 16 to 20 abrogates or derogates from any right, privilege or obligation with respect to the English and French languages, or either of them, that exists or is continued by virtue of any other provision of the Constitution of Canada. The purpose of Section 21 is to protect language rights that already exist in other parts of the Constitution. For example, Section 133 of the Constitution Act, 1867 gives the people of Quebec the right to use either English or French in the Quebec legislature, and before any of the courts of that province.
Okay, so this just kind of... Okay, I was hoping to get to the... I mean... This is, Is this kind of like a preamble summary, or... I thought it was on the... Is this the actual charter? This is like... Just these... I have read the Constitution before. This is kind of the guide to the Constitution. Okay. Okay, so I want to find the charter itself. It's contained within the Constitution Act, so again, you know, like online sources, it's interesting to think about how we might be 100% certain of the dependability of our online sources here, and that like there's an awful lot of effort to assuage your focus online, or what you're looking at. Is it just that I've already read through? I've already read through the parts that it seems as if might apply to my matter.
Guide to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. 1. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. The Charter protects those basic rights and freedoms of all Canadians that are considered essential to preserving Canada as a free and democratic country. It applies to all.
So ultimately what this boils down to is that I sit on one side of the debate as to what demonstrably justified means. This term, demonstrably justified. One could use that to create a police state. Everything is demonstrably justified. So ultimately, it's that question: Do we live in a police state? If I am able to achieve my justice, or if I'm given fair treatment in regard to my my effort at securing a position in law enforcement, I would say, or if I'm given some kind of other reasonable outcome, I would say that we're not living in a police state. However, I think at present, I would say to some degree, I would side with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think this is the all that and a bag of chips human rights legislation, and the Charter is somewhat more limited. It's got clauses in it, and I just hope that the justices come to agree that there's a balance between what we have in Canada and the United States. Like the United States, the way that they govern their society, legislation, we can read through maybe some American legislation. But okay, I think I've read the parts that pertain to my matter, or that pertain. This seems to be a lot of language legislation, like governing things that don't exactly apply. So I'm going to go to the Bill of Rights, Canada. Well, I'll just read this first.
Canadian Bill of Rights. The Canadian Bill of Rights, 1 French, Déclaration Canadienne des Droits, is a federal statute and Bill of Rights enacted by the Parliament of Canada on August 10, 1960. It provides Canadians with certain rights at Canadian federal law in relation to other federal statutes. It was the earliest expression of human rights law at the federal level in Canada, though an implied Bill of Rights had already been recognized in the Canadian Common Law. 3. The Canadian Bill of Rights remains in effect, but is widely acknowledged to be limited in its effectiveness, because it is a federal statute only, and so not directly applicable to provincial laws. 4 of 5. These legal and constitutional limitations were a significant reason that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was established as an unambiguously constitutional level Bill of Rights for all Canadians, governing the application of both federal and provincial law in Canada, with the patriation of the Constitution of Canada in 1982. Since patriation, its usefulness at federal law in Canada is mostly limited to issues pertaining to the enjoyment of property, as set forth in its Section 1A. The slightly broader life, liberty, and security of the person right than is recognized in Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. 6 or The Canadian Bill of Rights protects numerous rights, most of which were later included in the Charter. Examples include freedom of speech in Canada and freedom of religion in Canada, now in Section 2 of the Charter. Equality rights and more complete rights are contained in Section 15 of the Charter. The right to life, liberty and security of the person, and in another section, rights to fundamental justice. The Charter combines those rights in Section 7. The right to the enjoyment of property, which is not enshrined in the Charter. The right to counsel are now in Section 10 of the Charter. Section 2 of the Bill of Rights reads as follows. 2. Every law of Canada shall, unless it is expressly declared by an Act of the Parliament of Canada that it shall operate notwithstanding the Canadian Bill of Rights, be so construed and applied as not to abrogate, abridge or infringe or to authorize the abrogation, abridgment or infringement of any of the rights or freedoms herein recognized and declared, and in particular, no law of Canada shall be construed or applied so as to authorize or effect the arbitrary detention, imprisonment or exile of any person.
I just wanna restate. I'm gonna state it again. If anybody is listening to me right now, number one, I appreciate it. But number two, this issue that I'm trying to deal with in this research and in this effort, this general effort into a serious pursuit of an understanding that should allow me to have my own rights in this country. Like, this is the question. What is necessary in order to have one's own rights? I mean, nobody's going to give you rights. You're supposed to fight for your rights. So this is my fight for my rights. And to anybody that is considering protest or riot, I would suggest that maybe, I'm trying this. It doesn't seem to be very popular. I'm trying to do it this way, by deep effort. And we're going to see together what happens. I'm not claiming to be I'm not claiming to know what's going to happen here, but this is my very best effort. If all I can do is give this my very best effort, but I would say that from my perspective, the term "fight for your rights" is the truth. Apparently, this is my struggle. This is my fight for my human rights. This is my fight for the legislation to be upheld, essentially. And I hope people join me in this, because if I'm able to secure that for myself, then I think it will make it that much easier for others. So if you are listening, you're a special person.
Person. B. Impose or authorize the imposition of cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. C. Deprive a person who has been arrested or detained. I. Of the right to be informed promptly of the reason for his arrest or detention. 2. Of the right to retain and instruct counsel without
Okay.
without delay or
I'm just reflecting upon the fact that again, having counsel in a legal context, I mean, the business that is made out of criminal law, it just seems so susceptible to corruption. I mean, like, inherently, the wheelings and dealings and competitive aspects of business and the materialism that accompanies that. This is my struggle at present.
or 3. Of the remedy by way of habeas corpus for the determination of the validity of his detention, and for his release if the detention is not lawful. D. Authorize a court, tribunal, commission, board or other authority to compel a person to give evidence if he is denied counsel, protection against self-crimination or other constitutional safeguards. E. Deprive a person of the right to a fair hearing in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice for the determination of his rights and obligations. F. Deprive a person charged with a criminal offense of the right to be presumed innocent until proved guilty according to law in a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal, or of the right to reasonable bail without just cause, or G. Deprive a person of the right to the assistance of an interpreter in any proceedings in which he is involved or in which he is a party or a witness, before a court, commission, board or other tribunals, if he does not understand or speak the language in which such proceedings are conducted. The notwithstanding wording of Section 2 is a precursor to the notwithstanding clause of the Charter. While the Bill of Rights is considered only quasi-constitutional, because it was enacted as an ordinary act of the Parliament of Canada, it contains the following provision. 3.1 Subject to subsection 2, the Minister of Justice shall, in accordance with such regulations as may be prescribed by the Governor in Council, examine every regulation transmitted to the Clerk of the Privy Council for registration pursuant to the Statutory Instruments Act, and every bill introduced in or presented to the House of Commons by a Minister of the Crown, in order to ascertain whether any of the provisions thereof are inconsistent with the purposes and provisions of this part. And he shall report any such inconsistency to the House of Commons at the first convenient opportunity. 2. A regulation need not be examined in accordance with subsection 1 if prior to being made it was examined as a proposed regulation in accordance with Section 3 of the Statutory Instruments Act to ensure that it was not inconsistent with the purposes and provisions of this part. Criticism of the Bill of Rights has mostly centered on its limited effect. The ineffectiveness of the Bill of Rights in achieving its stated aim was the main reason that 2 decades later, it was thought necessary, 14, to adopt a constitutionally entrenched charter. The Bill of Rights was and is limited in several ways. Firstly, it does not explicitly amend any conflicting statutes, either to remove conflicts or to insert explicit allowances for the statutes to operate notwithstanding the Bill of Rights. 15. When called upon to apply conflicting laws, the courts typically sought to interpret a later statute as creating a minimal disturbance of earlier law. 16. In practice, that meant that the courts relied on Parliament to repeal or amend any laws contrary to the Bill of Rights. 17. Disappointments for those who wanted courts to enforce rights vigorously included Bliss v. Canada, AG, and Canada, AG v. Lovell. A notable exception was A v. Drybones. Second, since the Bill of Rights was not a constitutional amendment, there was some debate as to whether it was binding on future parliaments. Third, because it is an ordinary statute, the authority of the Bill of Rights is limited to matters set out in Section 91 of the Constitution Act, 1867, as being under the legislative authority of the Parliament of Canada. However, the 1960 Act enumerates some rights, such as property rights, and specific legal rights not protected under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. For that and other reasons, the 1960 Act is regularly referenced in court decisions today. 18.
The Canadian Human Rights Act. I wish they'd include a link here, like a link to the actual best source of the legislation. Where, I mean, it may be here, but it's difficult to find. Okay, so we'll go to here. Canadian Human Rights Act. Bing has it. I'm not sure how everybody feels about Bing in comparison to Google. Here we go. The purpose of this act is to extend the laws of Canada to give effect within the purview of matters coming within the legislative authority of Parliament to the principle that all individuals should have the opportunity to equal with other individuals to make for themselves the lives that they are able to wish to have their needs accommodated consistent with their duties. This is nicer. I'm digging this a little bit more. Consistent with their duties and obligations as members of society without being hindered in or prevented from doing so by discriminatory practices based upon race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation. The age discrimination thing. I think that's the that's the one really unspoken truth of society, is that there is much inherent discrimination based upon age. I think there's a lot of very competent, very intelligent young people that I can think of that are intelligent as they come, and we just, we automatically discriminate on age a little bit. Sexual orientation, gender, identity or expression, marital status, family status, genetic characteristics. That's funny. Disability or conviction for an offense for which a pardon has been granted or in respect of which a record suspension has been ordered. So this is a little bit different than the BC Human Rights Code, because the BC Human Rights Code does not specify this, the suspension or the pardoning. The BC Human Rights Code says just straight, you can't discriminate based upon a conviction. I think that eliminates a little bit of the bureaucracy that may accompany trying to have your conviction pardoned. I mean, for the purposes of this act, the prohibited grounds of discrimination are race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation. I just want to stress, this reminds me to mention this point again. And the point is this: even if we reach a perfectly non-racialized society where we are, so I think we're making very, very strong progress. We've had Barack Obama in the White House. In Canada, we could clearly elect Jagmeet Singh, and I would love to see Jagmeet Singh elected. In fact, I think that I put Justin Trudeau into office. I voted for Justin Trudeau when he was elected into office. I think I may vote for Jagmeet Singh, and I don't see there as being any reason why Jagmeet Singh could not take a term as the Prime Minister. I think that would be great for Canada. It would be great for our culture, and then maybe Trudeau could get it back again. He's young. Where the ground of discrimination is refusal of a request to undergo a genetic test or to disclose or authorize the disclosure of the results of a genetic test, the discrimination shall be deemed to be on the ground of genetic characteristics. Multiple grounds of discrimination. For greater certainty, a discriminatory practice includes a practice based on one or more prohibited grounds of discrimination or on the effect of a combination of prohibited grounds. Orders regarding discriminatory practices. A discriminatory practice as described in sections 5 to 14.1 may be the subject of a complaint under Part 3, and anyone found to be engaging or to have engaged in a discriminatory practice may be made subject to an order as provided in Section 53. Discriminatory practices, denial of goods, service, facility, or accommodation. It is a discriminatory practice in the provision of goods, services, facilities, or accommodation of customarily available to the general public to deny access to any such goods, service, facility, or accommodation to any individual, or to differentiate adversely in relation to any individual on a prohibited ground of discrimination. I just think that much of this specificity, I always reflect upon John Rawls. That was recommended to me by a really nice person in a coffee shop. I sat down next to this person, and I was reading HLA Hart at the time, and they were studying law at university, or they were doing a project on, they were writing an essay comparing the philosophy of the Republic by Plato's Republic to John Rawls, and I had never read Rawls or really thought about him before, but it was interesting because as soon as I picked up a book, I opened it, and the first quote that was at the beginning of the book was an HLA Hart quote, and maybe we'll get into some HLA Hart in the future, but yeah, I just want to state again, I've experienced so much of this, unfair, with regard to the John Rawls thing, like, justice as fairness. I think it's as simple as that. I mean, it should be reasonable to quote John Rawls in a courtroom. I think that should be perfectly reasonable, and it should, like, really well respected legal and political theorists should be held in high regard by any adjudicating entity. If somebody has a truly applicable citation or quote from somebody like that, I just see there as being a real motion on behalf of the Crown representatives that I've had to deal with, or the predisposition of well-established judges to want to have immediate recourse to this form of guidance, the guidance that we are provided. And although I do respect that it is provided to us through a strictly democratic process and reinforced by the powers that be, I think there are certain eloquences of things like justice is fairness that are very efficient and advantageous. Employment. It is a discriminatory practice, directly or indirectly, to refuse to employ or continue to employ an individual, or in the course of employment to differentiate adversely in relation to an employee on a prohibited ground of discrimination. I can't help but reflect upon how I feel about how unfairly I have been treated. How unfairly I have been treated by my employers. I can't begin to describe that in past instances, and it's unfortunate. So I have a lot of sympathy, because this stuff is like, it's words, and when you're a guy on an oil rig trying to make as much money as he's able to at that given moment, just because it seems like the right thing to do, it's pretty far removed from this legislation. Like, it's very, very difficult to reconcile the intention of this kind of legislation. I mean, the intention is fairness to people, and from my experience, I've just experienced a lot of really extremely unfair treatment in regard to, like, formal employment circumstances.
Canadian Human Rights Act RC 1980. Employment. 7. It is a discriminatory practice, directly or indirectly. A. To refuse to employ or continue to employ any individual, or B. In the course of employment, to differentiate adversely in relation to an employee on a prohibited ground of discrimination. Employment applications, advertisements. 8. It is a discriminatory practice. A. To use or circulate any form of application for employment, or B. In connection with employment or prospective employment, to publish any advertisement or to make any written or oral inquiry that expresses or implies any limitation, specification or preference based on a prohibited ground of discrimination. 1976-77, c. 33, s. 8. Employee organizations. 9.1. It is a discriminatory practice for an employee organization on a prohibited ground of discrimination. A. To exclude an individual from full membership in the organization. B. To expel or suspend a member of the organization, or C. To limit, segregate, classify or otherwise act in relation to an individual in a way that would deprive the individual of employment opportunities, or limit employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affect the status of the individual, where the individual is a member of the organization or where any of the obligations of the organization pursuant to a collective agreement relate to the individual. Discriminatory policy or practice. 10. It is a discriminatory practice for an employer
I'd say with regard to this, I mean, the extent to which the District of West Vancouver is guilty of violating this is appalling. I mean, I cannot even begin to describe how much this is ridiculous, the situation that I'm in. I mean, it is absolutely flabbergasting how ridiculous it is that I have to do this. You know, PewDiePie is, I mean, like, if you guys knew, if you only knew the reality of this situation.
Employer, employee organization, or employer organization. A. To establish or pursue a policy or practice, or B. To enter into an agreement affecting recruitment, referral, hiring, promotion, training, apprenticeship, transfer, or any other matter relating to employment or prospective employment. That deprives or tends to deprive an individual or class of individuals of any employment opportunities on a prohibited ground of discrimination. IAS 1985, c. Equal wages. 11.1 That is a discriminatory practice for an employer to establish or maintain differences in wages between male and female employees employed in the same establishment who are performing work of equal value. Assessment of value of work. 2. In assessing the value of work performed by employees employed in the same establishment, the criterion to be applied is the composite of the skill, effort, and responsibility required in the performance of the work, and the conditions under which the work is performed. Separate establishments. 3. Separate establishments established or maintained by an employer solely or principally for the purpose of establishing or maintaining differences in wages between male and female employees shall be deemed for the purposes of this section to be the same establishment. Different wages based on prescribed reasonable factors. 4. Notwithstanding subsection 1, it is not a discriminatory practice to pay to male and female employees different wages if the difference is...
It just causes me to reflect a little bit upon the academic credential system again. I have a friend, he's a PhD, he's the smartest person in the world, and he's not making that much money right now. He will make lots and lots of money. But Elon Musk, for example. Elon Musk has two bachelor's degrees, and he is the richest man on earth. It's just interesting, because, I mean, like, it's interesting how we just allow that disparity to occur in the whole human enterprise. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to accept how children can be killed in war, and Elon Musk can exist. It's amazing how that whole gradient spectrum exists. It seems like too much to believe, actually.
Is based on a factor prescribed by guidelines issued by the Canadian Human Rights Commission pursuant to subsection 27(2) to be a reasonable factor that justifies the difference. Idem 5. For greater certainty, sex does not constitute a reasonable factor justifying a difference in wages. No reduction of wages. 6. An employer shall not reduce wages in order to eliminate a discriminatory practice described in this section. Definition of wages. 7. For the purposes of this section, wages means any form of remuneration payable for work performed by an individual, and includes A. Salaries, commissions, vacation pay, dismissal wages and bonuses. B. Reasonable value for board, rent, housing and lodging. C. Payments in kind. D. Employer contributions to pension funds or plans, long-term disability plans, and all forms of health insurance plans, and any other advantage received directly or indirectly from the individual's employer.
This definitely applies for me. I mean, I'm going to be able to use some of this. It is a discriminatory practice to publish or display before the public, or to cause to be published or displayed before the public any notice, sign, symbol, or emblem, or other representation that expresses or implies discrimination or an intention to discriminate, or incites or is calculated to incite others to discriminate. It's interesting how, I mean, abstract images can be interpreted in so many ways. The Charlie Hebdo thing, I mean, it's very difficult to quantify. If the discrimination expressed or implied is intended to be, I mean, there's obviously a lot of clear-cut cases, but if the discrimination expressed or implied is intended to be expressed or implied or incite or incited or calculated to be incited, would otherwise, if engaged in, be a discriminatory practice described in any of that's what I think a lot of people think of when they think of legislation or written law. If the discrimination expressed or implied intended to be expressed, I think they missed is. If the discrimination expressed or implied is intended to be expressed or implied, yay, or incited or calculated to be incited, would otherwise, if engaged in, be a discriminatory practice prescribed in any other sections. Okay, harassment. It is a discriminatory this is interesting because I assert that I have been harassed by police. It is a discriminatory practice in the provision of goods, services, facilities, or accommodation customarily available to the general public, in the provision of commercial, I mean, this is interesting when I think about the hard evidence that I have to suggest that the police did harass me. I mean, it's funny. It is a discriminatory practice in the provision of goods, services, facilities, or accommodation customarily available to the general public, in the provision of commercial premises or residential accommodation, or in the matters related to employment, to harass an individual or a prohibited ground on a prohibited ground of discrimination. It's funny. I mean, like, as soon as it's just so ridiculous to think about my situation for me. Like, I'm just reflecting upon my acknowledgement of why people other than myself, seem to have very little patience for this. It is not a discriminatory practice if any refusal, exclusion, expulsion, suspension, limitation, specification, or preference in relation to any employment is established by an employer to be based on a bona fide occupational requirement. Well, that's interesting, because you can just use that kind of thing to, I mean, like, I'm just anticipating what the people who are doing this to me are going to say in response to what I have to say to them, right? I think it's pretty explicit. Like, I think it's pretty easy to understand that certain human rights are stipulated, and at present, I will tell you, they're not being upheld. So we're gonna see how this one plays out. I'm in a dark space here, I guess. I'm losing a little bit of faith here.
Canadian Human Rights Act RC 1985 C. Exception 6. The proposed regulation need not be published more than once, whether or not it has been amended as a result of any representations. Making of regulations. 7. The Governor in Council may proceed to make regulations under subsection 3 after 6 months have elapsed since the publication of the proposed regulations in the Canada Gazette, whether or not a report described in subsection 5 is filed. Application 8. This section applies in respect of a practice regardless of whether it results in direct discrimination or adverse effect discrimination. Universality of service for Canadian forces. 9. Subsection 2 is subject to the principle of universality of service, under which members of the Canadian forces must at all times, and under any circumstances, perform any functions that they may be required to perform. IS 1985 C. H. 6 S. 15. IS 1985 C. 32 2nd Sup. S. 41. 1998 C. 9 SS 10 15. 2011 C. 24 S. 166. 2012 C. 16 S. 83. Previous version. Special programs. 16.1. It is not a discriminatory practice for a person to adopt or carry out a special program, plan or arrangement designed to prevent disadvantages that are likely to be suffered by, or to eliminate or reduce disadvantages that are suffered by, any group of individuals when those disadvantages would be based on or related to the prohibited grounds of discrimination, by improving opportunities respecting goods, services, facilities, accommodation or employment in relation to that group. Advice and assistance. 2. The Canadian Human Rights Commission may make general recommendations concerning desirable objectives for special programs, plans or arrangements referred to in subsection 1 and b. On application, give such advice and assistance with respect to the adoption or carrying out of a special program, plan or arrangement referred to in subsection 1, as will serve to aid in the achievement of the objectives the program, plan or arrangement was designed to achieve. Collection of information relating to prohibited grounds. 3. It is not a discriminatory practice to collect information relating to a prohibited ground of discrimination if the information is intended to be used in adopting or carrying out a special program, plan or arrangement under subsection 1. IS 1985 C. H. 6 S. 16. 1998 C. 9 S. 16. Plans to meet the needs of disabled persons. 17.1. The person who proposes to implement a plan for adapting any services, facilities, premises, equipment or operations to meet the needs of persons arising from a disability may apply to the Canadian Human Rights Commission for approval of the plan. Approval of plan. 2. The Commission may, by written notice to a person making an application pursuant to subsection 1, approve the plan if the Commission is satisfied that the plan is appropriate for meeting the needs of persons arising from a disability. Effect of approval of accommodation plan. 3. Where any services, facilities, premises, equipment or operations are adapted in accordance with a plan approved under subsection 2, matters for which the plan provides do not constitute any basis for a complaint under Part 3 regarding discrimination based on any disability in respect of which the plan was approved. Notice when application not granted. 4. When the Commission decides not to grant an application made pursuant to subsection 1, it shall send a written notice of its decision to the applicant setting out the reasons for its decision. 1980-81-82-83, C. 143, S. 9. Previous page. Next page.
Alright, I'm gonna cut this one asunder and start a new one. If you listen to all of this, you are all the way my top number one.